You took your first breath in Japan somewhere between the 800s and 1800s, most likely in the 1500s or 1600s, because this was the era when ninjas were most popular. As soon as you were isolated from society because you were born a ninja. You wouldn't play with other children. In fact, you wouldn't have a single friend throughout your entire childhood. You had only one purpose: to be trained in the most efficient way possible to become a silent assassin and spy. Of course, your family waited until you were weaned before starting your training, and what awaited you was not exactly a gentle education. You spent your crawling phase dragging yourself through thorny bushes. But as a ninja, the most important skill you had to learn was moving without making a sound. And yes, this was instilled in you from birth, because silence is your greatest weapon. After spending a few years with these routines and turning 5, it was time for your training to get even tougher, and during this process, you received your textbook. Ninjas even had a book full of techniques passed down from generation to generation, which they called ninjutsu. I can almost hear you say, "I crawled through thorny bushes as a baby, how much harder can the training get?" But rest assured, what you experienced was nothing compared to what you were about to see. The first lesson in your real training journey was to thoroughly reinforce the silence training you had already received. This meant that if you stepped on a small twig and made even the slightest noise, you were done for. Therefore, you had to learn to walk, run, and climb without alerting the enemy. You also had to learn how to disappear from plain sight and blend into your surroundings. This usually meant hiding in the shadows in dark places or among crowds. In short, you were playing a professional game of hide and seek just to survive, because you only had one chance to get caught. Meanwhile, your ongoing training included climbing walls and mountains, and learning to infiltrate castles or enemy buildings using ropes, ladders, and grappling hooks. You would also learn to assume different identities. This way, you could secretly infiltrate enemy camps, gather intelligence, or eliminate targets. You could disguise yourself as a traveler, a monk, a merchant, a farmer, a military leader, or a samurai. You received special training for every disguise, covering movements, speech patterns, and behaviors, basically acting lessons. If you failed to complete this training, your family would often abandon you. You couldn't just quit your training whenever you wanted, because ninja clans were very strict about this. If you tried to escape, to prevent the secrets of your training and martial arts from being revealed, at best, you would be left entirely on your own. And that's the best case scenario, because usually, well, I think you get the point. The weapons you had to master included katanas and short swords for close combat. For long distances, the weapon you used the most was the star-shaped shuriken. It was the most iconic ninja weapon, but you didn't use it to kill. You generally used it to slow down or weaken your opponent. You would also learn to use blowpipes, poisoned arrows, smoke bombs, and flashbangs. Smoke bombs obscured vision and gave you a chance to escape, while flashbangs were used to create distractions. And you weren't just shooting spitballs through that blowpipe. You lived in the same era as the samurai, and although you often worked together, your duties were entirely different. While you handled espionage and stealth missions, samurai fought on the front lines, but ninjas weren't considered very noble, usually coming from poor families. Samurai, on the other hand, were from the upper class, belonged to the military, and were respected as warriors, meaning you were disadvantaged from birth. Anyway, you pushed through the training routines and turned 10, revealing a notable trait: you were a frail and scrawny kid. By the age of 10, you had mastered basic stealth, combat, and survival skills, and even went on your own assassination missions at a young age. Yes, even T-year-old ninjas killed people. Because of this, the life expectancy of ninjas was very low. If you were lucky, you lived to be 30, but most died in their 20s. Some even earlier. From a young age, you were taught not to trust anyone, knowing you could be betrayed by other ninjas, or you could be deceived by your employer. Honing your basic stealth, combat, and survival skills was paramount. Between taking down a few targets and surviving, you completed your first decade of service. When you reached your 20s, you were at your physical and mental peak, your prime, but this was also when you were given the most dangerous missions. You could remain on secret missions in enemy territory for weeks, maybe even months, typically assassinating military leaders. Your methods included poisoning water wells, setting buildings on fire, or attacking with the classic ninja star. You would also use your poison blow darts, fully utilizing all your training with complete gear during this era, and you could marry if you wanted to. But it wasn't about flirting or a beautiful love story. Most marriages were arranged. If you worked for the state, you could only marry other ninjas. So yes, there were female ninjas too, and while marrying a ninja woman might sound nice, you didn't really have another choice anyway. Anyway, you took the step toward marriage. You joined your path with another ninja from the clan with no big wedding, just a small room and a few witnesses from the family. Of course, compared to others in arranged marriages, you got lucky. You and your spouse fell madly in love, and 2 years later, you had a child. During this time, your spouse retired from being a ninja, while you continued your missions. Between your child's training and your deadly missions, the days flew by, and you turned 30, which didn't happen very often. In your 30s, you would transition into retirement, as ninjas had to retire early, because an iron body, a sharp mind, and an iron will faded with age. But actually, because you were highly experienced, you couldn't fully enjoy your retirement. People still sought you out for critical missions everywhere. You had mastered the art of donning multiple disguises and manipulating your enemies. In fact, before people attacked cities, they would knock on your door and ask for help. You would disguise yourself, infiltrate the city, and destroy the enemy soldiers' morale by spreading rumors or inventing terrifying legends. Meaning you struck the hardest blow without ever drawing a weapon. Psychological warfare and chaos. Most soldiers would be too terrified to fight, either dropping their weapons or trembling on the battlefield. Anyway, at 32, just as your child was about to take master classes on the ninja path, the bells of war rang in your region, and the worst part was, they were directly targeting you, the ninja clans. Oda Nobunaga was trying to unify Japan, and the ninja territories hadn't picked a side. You had remained independent. Staying neutral was your best option due to historical, social, and strategic factors. Because you lived by the logic of mercenary warfare, you weren't usually bound to a specific clan or state army. Your jobs were primarily dictated by money, missions, and contracts. And your survival strategy was stealth. You moved in small, shadowy groups. Openly supporting one side would have made you a direct target for the enemy. So, remaining neutral or operating in secret increased your chances of survival, and you couldn't compromise your espionage and intelligence roles. Your main duty was gathering information, committing sabotage, and weakening the enemy. And naturally, your political independence couldn't be broken. Regions like Iga and Koga were in isolated mountainous areas. This isolation allowed you to live without getting directly involved in the power plays between major states or samurai clans. Thus, you protected your own territory while providing services to the outside world. Meaning directly choosing a side was openly signing your own death warrant. When the armies arrived, you chose to fight and your luck held out. Because you faced a small army, and thanks to your ambush and sabotage techniques, they suffered a heavy defeat. You had won a brilliant victory, but it didn't last long. 2 years later, the bells of war rang once more. Armies were at your door again, but this time you were facing around 40,000 soldiers. Because you were severely outnumbered, you had no choice but to fight on the front lines. Your light armor and stealth-focused training put you at a massive disadvantage against the heavily armed samurai armies. Many ninjas fought heroically on the front lines with swords, spears, and arrows. Meanwhile, the other ninjas who grew up with you and labeled you weak chose to flee. However, it wasn't the kind of battle you could win, and just as you faced this bitter reality, you took a sword strike to the chest. Your vision blurred and you began to stagger. There was nothing but countless deaths all around you, but right at that moment, you saw your wife and child escaping toward the mountains. Yes, maybe you had been labeled a weak man since childhood. Maybe you hadn't lived the life you wanted, but seeing that your child didn't die in the war and knowing they could build a new life in the distant mountains made you smile even in your final moments. As a man with a frail body but an agile heart, you took your last breath with a smile on your face. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and like the video, and be part of the journey as we grow this channel together. And just like that, Don Chichi disappears.